In a time of old, amidst the northern lands of ancient China, a man was born of a goddess and a dragon. From his divine blood would sprout the wisdom and character his legend would echo through the ages. A powerful ruler, a humble sage, a mighty hero. His legacy left behind many great tales and feats. He shot the 9 suns down the sky, defeated the horned serpent demon Gonggong, and set peace where before was war. Yet there was one thing Emperor Yao could not control, and that was his own son. See, blood is thicker than any beast or burden, and the young man's vicious and rebellious nature posed a greater challenge than the mightiest of demons to our hero. But Yao had a plan. He made a board out of mulberry wood and crafted black and white pieces with rhinoceros and elephant bones. It was a game, easy to play, but very hard to master. It was meant to teach his son diligence, patience, and prowess, and so effective it was that almost 4,000 years later, this game continues to challenge the sharpest of minds. This is ancient gaming, and today we will walk the Great Wall of Chinese history by the hand of Weiqi, or as it is popularly known, the game of Go. Go is the most popular name with which people refer to this game in the West. The word is the romanization of the Japanese kanji Igo, but the game is otherwise known by different names in different Asian countries. In Korea, the game is known as Baduk, in Tibet as Micmacs, and in China by Weiqi, which literally means the encirclement board game. This apparently simple game of black and white stones is one of the juggernauts of ancient gaming. It is not only one of the oldest board games that we know, but the oldest game known to date that has been continuously played throughout history up to this day. And after almost 4 millennia, the game stands as strong as it has ever been. In fact, many would consider Go the king of ancient board games. Yes, even above chess. Despite being still rather obscure in the West, the popularity of Go in Asia is huge, especially in China, Japan, and Korea, where there are more than 100 million active players. And not just casual players either. Major tournament winners are international celebrities, with daily newspaper coverage, popular weekly and monthly Go magazines, and even 24-hour cable stations that cover the game non-stop. Go is an intense part of Asian culture, and its mastery a respectable endeavor. For this reason, the game has been often used extensively as a metaphor and allegory in multiple forms of art and literature throughout history, which, as we have seen many times, is a common trope of every great game that requires high skill and strategy. The myth of Emperor Yao that I began the video with is but one of the many examples we have of how Go was used to explain history and convey virtue, and arguably the most known account regarding the origins of the game. Everyone in China knows this tale, and you will see it often quoted when speaking about Weiqi. But of course, the game was not invented by a demigod who is called a kid. The actual origins of the game is a little more complicated. And again, if you watch this channel, you know that means a lot more complicated. In fact, the Yao myths arguably tell us more about the attempt of the Han period writers to advance the interests of the emperors whom the chronicler served than about Yao himself, let alone about the actual origins of the game. As Go historian Peter Shotwell rightly puts it, the original Yao myth cycle dealt with the control of the floods, but was altered by the Han writers into a tale about the workings of a government, very much like their own and run by a virtuous emperor. Like many of the founding fathers of other great civilizations, these stories serve more the interest and cultural imagery of their distant heirs than history itself, and often vary with the elements they introduce and how they introduce them. In some stories, for example, it is not Yao but Shun who teaches Go to Dan Tzu, and in others, Go is not even mentioned. By the way, you have probably realized that I don't speak a word of Chinese, but hey, this is what you get. The link of Go to Yao is usually attributed to the 3rd century scholar Zhang Hua and his Babuzi. a compendium of Chinese stories about natural wonders and marvelous phenomena where he included the Weiqi remark. But the connection of the game was most likely older than that, and supposedly based in the Shiben or Book of Origins, a lost book first reference in the earlier times of the Han Dynasty. Anthropologists argue that this connection between Go and Yao was in fact introduced as a way to counter the early Confucian moralists who criticized the game. Confucius, after all, did not appear to have much regard for the game, and considered men should put their minds to something of more use. By the time of Zhang Hua, Weiqi was already hugely popular among Chinese society, and many literati basically considered it a waste of time. Think of like a Chinese League of Legends, but with much worse graphics and much more gambling, and sometimes a little bit of violence. Now that I think of it, yeah, pretty much like League of Legends. Mencius, for instance, was even more vehement with his criticism towards Go and put it second in a list of 5 categories of unfilial acts. Together with laziness, greed and favoring one's wife and children over one's parents, pursuing sensual pleasures, and bragging and arguing. It is pretty clear that the underlying issue with both these criticisms and other criticisms of this time focus around extreme devotion to the game. In other words, apparently a big part of Chinese society was quite addicted to Weiqi, or at least that is what people who did not care about it perceived. If you like video games, you are probably familiar with these kind of debates. We haven't changed that much after all. In any case, even during this period, Go did enjoy a high degree of popularity. But it wouldn't be until the times of the Tang Dynasty that the game would really skyrocket. Several emperors became active Go enthusiasts and promoted it, to the point that playing Weiqi was listed as one of the 4 arts, or siji, that any true gentleman should know, along with calligraphy, playing the lute, and painting. China's most famous poets such as Bo Huji or Du Fu enjoyed playing Weiqi and writing poems about it, and hardly any intellectual ignored at least the basic principles that made the skilled player. Even Confucian literati started favoring the game and reinterpreted some aspects of Weiqi as coherent with the teachings of their philosophy. At this point, descriptions about the game also became even more ethereal, with the influence of a heaven-oriented Buddhism over Taoist and Confucian thought. Don't worry, I'll get back to this, it's starting to get a little confusing. See, Chinese cosmogonies focused deeply around humans' interaction with their environment, and mostly about how the different forces of that environment interacted between themselves and found balance together. Something that would later become an integral part within the broader concept of Feng Shui, but that in fact constitutes the very roots of the long and complex history of Chinese philosophy. These forces were often linked or directly embody the elements of nature, such as the heavens, the water, or the earth. And like in many other cultures, people used them and built a mythology around them to understand and explain the world that they knew. Again, in the Yao myth, Yao himself comes from the heavens, and the demon serpent Gongong is the reckless water spirit that brings havoc to the land. On paper, we have a tale of a mighty hero fighting a dragon, whereas in fact we're looking at the very real struggles that Chinese folks faced against the constant floods of the Yellow River and the Yangtze valleys. But don't worry, I have not forgotten that this is a video about Go. If I am telling you all this, it's because this was the collective worldview in which Go was created and coexisted, and naturally people used it to explain the game, its origins, and its purpose. Where earlier cosmological interpretations of Go had focused more in the earth, by the time of the Song Dynasty, the influence of a heaven-oriented Buddhism over Chinese thought led many to turn their view to the heaven. The most famous example of this is arguably Chinese 11th century treatise Weiqi in 13 chapters, which is a Weiqi manual where the game is explicitly linked with astrology. It says, the 360 intersections correspond to the number of days in a year. Divided into 4 corners like the 4 seasons, they have 90 intersections each, like the number of days in a season. There are 72 intersections on the sides, like the number of 5-day weeks in a year. This connection to astrology is one of the favorite Go origins theory of many anthropologists and Go enthusiasts, and indeed it is easy to imagine a Go game as a beautiful display of stars and constellations. In fact, this is exactly what the famous historian Ban Gu stated in the Yizi, or the Essence of Go, which is the oldest surviving text devoted specifically to Weiqi. He said, "The board must be square and represents the laws of the earth. The lines must be straight like the divine virtues. There are black and white stones divided like yin and yang. The arrangement on the board is like a model of the heavens." Although compelling, these theories present some major problems, leaving out the fact that these allegories are way older than our first references about the game in the Zuo Zhuan. There is a common overlooked trope in the fact that it was only in the Tang Dynasty that the Weiqi board changed from a 17 by 17 grid with 289 intersections to a 19 by 19 grid with 361 intersections. Furthermore, the Stargaze hypothesis tends to misrepresent how Chinese astrology was understood by times of the Zuo Dynasty, which is probably when the game was born. It was the movement and location of the planets that was important for them, and their motion resembled anything like the principles of Weiqi, which, like its own name suggests, was about surrounding. Also, when studying ancient games, be always wary of divination texts and explanations. Divination is indeed a very important element to consider. In fact, I made a whole video about this topic. You will have probably noticed how I always refer to it in my videos. That's how important divination is to understand ancient games. But it is also a very misleading way to pinpoint the origins of a game, and why and how it was created. And astrological connections to games in Chinese literature are not particularly uncommon. If you ask me, I do not think Go was invented as a means to convey or teach a particular spiritual or metaphorical message, or at least there is no evidence that suggests that. More than about the origins of Go, I think these stories tell us more about the human psyche and its tendency to draw meaningful connections between mundane experiences and the struggles of their daily lives. In other words, as tools to understand themselves and their environment, which, ironically, it's the kind of purpose they try to ascribe to these games, often overlooking the fact that sometimes people just want to make games to have fun. People do this with all kind of things, but as for history goes, I'm afraid the actual origins of the game and how it was created will remain a matter of speculation. And that is as far as we go with the history of Weiqi in China, at least for today. But we are far from finished with the history of this game. As I said, this one is one, if not the biggest one of ancient games, and the history is quite big too. As you have probably noticed. But now, as always, let's learn how to actually play the game. Oppa! Go games are typically played in 19 by 19 squared grid boards, that is, boards that have 19 intersections on each side. These may be a little confusing for anyone familiar with Western chess and not with Go, because the stones in Go are not played within a square, but on the intersections between them. A 19 by 19 intersections board would then have 18 squares on each side. As I mentioned in the video, early Weiqi games were played in 17 by 17 boards, but today the most common sizes are 19 by 19, 13 by 13 and 9 by 9, although there are many others. For this video, I will use the 9 by 9 board since it's the one commonly used to introduce beginner players into the game, and also because most of us have a chessboard at home. Aside from that, the only thing players need to play is a set of black and white stones, one for each player. Unlike chess, blacks move first, and then the game continues, with each player playing one stone per turn on top of an intersection. These stones will remain on their spot until the game ends or until they are captured. The objective of the game then is to gain more points than your opponent by capturing territory or by capturing stones. To capture an enemy stone, one player must completely surround it with his own stones. This is done by occupying all the enemy stone's liberties. Liberties are, therefore, the empty intersections around each stone. The moment the last liberty of a stone is occupied, the stone is captured and kept until the end of the game by the player who captured it. These captured stones will later account for 1 point each. Stones of the same color that are connected orthogonally share the liberties and, if captured, are captured as a group. A group of stones that is about to be captured, or in other words, has only one liberty left, is called an atari, which means about to win in Japanese. You are only allowed to place a stone on an intersection without liberties if that position is an atari, that is, that play would allow you to capture at least one opposing stone. With regards to capture, there is also a rule against repetition named the Ko rule. Players are not allowed to make a move that returns the game to the previous position, even if that involves a capture. An example of this would be the following situation. Black has just played a stone to capture a white stone at the adjoining intersection. If white were allowed to play on the same intersection, that move would capture the same black stone we just played and recreate the initial position. Allowing this could result in an unending cycle of captures by both players. The core rule would therefore prohibit white from playing at the same intersection immediately, and thus force him to play elsewhere or pass the turn. If black, however, uses his next turn to play a stone elsewhere, white then will be allowed to perform the capture, since this would not replicate the previous situation. With that in mind, players should also focus on capturing as much territory as possible, and that leads us to the scoring system, which is one of the most confusing concepts to understand for new players. Nowadays, most Go games are played digitally, and in such games territory is usually counted automatically by an algorithm, so it is not absolutely necessary to understand it if you want to start playing right away. In fact, it is a good idea to play a few games to familiarize first with the basic concepts before jumping into specific situations. However, it is not a bad idea either to explore at least some basic principles of Go that will help you understand how territory is counted, since that will help you develop an appropriate strategy when trying to capture territory and also serve as an introduction to the actual complexity of Go's mechanics. The basic definition for the captured territory of one player would be something along the lines of the number of empty intersections surrounded by the stones of that player and/or the edge of the board. In other words, an area that is sealed off. Each intersection within a player's territory accounts for one single point. In situations like the one shown on the screen, this is intuitive, as you can easily count and tell what territory belongs to each player. But usually, by the end of the game, layouts are much more complicated. Look at this other scenario. Most beginner players in Go would have no trouble identifying this territory as belonging to white, and they would be correct. The down right corner is, after all, clearly sealed off by white stones and the edge of the board. But pay attention now to this other scenario. Virtually everything is the same, but in this case, both the empty intersections and all the white stones belong to black's territory. Yeah, welcome to Go's scoring system. Confusing as it may seem, this is actually fairly intuitive. Let me explain. In Go, there are certain situations and shape of group of stones that, no matter how the game would continue, they would always be captured. These are called dead stones and are removed at the end of the game as points for the opposing player. Generally speaking, a group of stones is alive so long as it has at least two eyes. That is, two secured internal liberties or group of liberties. While beginner players may have trouble identifying which shapes and situations account for dead stones, more skilled players are able to tell them apart right away. For this reason, Go games do not require all intersections of the board to be completed for the game to end, but instead require both players to pass in succession or one of them to resign. This is made to spare time, since the result will always be the same anyway. In any case, it can happen that two players disagree about the status of certain groups after the game ends. This is known as a dispute, and there are ways around this problem. According, for example, to the rules of the American Go Association, if the players disagree about the status of a group of stones left on the board after both have passed, play is resumed, with the opponent of the last player to pass having the move. However, disputes are very rare and usually arise between the newer players. Besides, analyzing which groups and shapes account for captured territory is part of the charm of the game. I will not go here over all the shapes, exceptions and particular situations like the Seki. That would make the video hours long. The idea of this tutorial is for you to get started in the game in case that you later want to dive deep down the rabbit hole, which I definitely recommend, by the way. Aside from that, there is one last rule you should know, and that is the rule known as Komi. If you play an online game of Go, you will notice how the white player usually gets an extra amount of points after the game ends. This extra score is the komi, and was introduced during the first half of the 20th century as a means to compensate the white player for playing second, and has since become a standard rule in official tournaments around the world. The amount of extra points varies depending on several factors, like the size of the board or handicap. For a 9x9 game, the komi is usually 5,5 points. This is also a good moment to mention that there are different rule variations, particularly between Chinese and Japanese rules. However, these differences are said to cause problems in perhaps 1 in every 10,000 games in competition. In other words, they are more theoretical than practical and do not change at all the character of the game. My suggestion is for you to not worry about any of these and just jump right into the game, preferably through online platforms like onlinego.com, where you will easily find many players and won't have to worry about calculating the score yourself. There are also many good mobile apps of Go, so you can use any of these, like Baduk Pop, for example. That's the one I use. And that is everything for today. So, as always, thank you guys for watching. This was a very fun video to make, for many reasons. The first one is that we finally reached the 500 subscribers. I never thought we would get to that when I started this channel, to be honest, and I'm really surprised that we reached that so fast. Well, it took almost a year, but well, that is very fast for me. And the other reason is that I actually got into this game recently. I did not know about it. A friend of mine showed it to me. And I was surprised about how fun it is to play. And the history behind that, I mean, it is so huge and so interesting. I hope I can make another video about it, especially the history in Japan. And more about the things in China that I left off, because there's many interesting stuff. And so he is the one also that gave me these stones, my friend Nacho, so thank you from here too. And the game board that you saw in the gameplay section, it was made by my uncle, so thank you to my uncle for making that game board for me, for this video. He's very good with wood stuff, I'm very bad at it. And it is actually made from a tree that we had to cut down because it was ill, that it was in my farmhouse that I grew up when I was little. And it was pretty cool to me to have like a board made of that wood, so I can have it with me always. Well, I mean, not always, I'm not going to go carrying a 10 kilos board, but you know what I mean. And with that, don't forget to like the video if you learned something new, and subscribe if you want to learn more about other old games and how to play them. And if you want to go that step farther, share the video. That would really help a lot the channel. We are in our way to the 600 now, so let's do it. Until the next time. Go is an intense part of Asian culture. Ya está, dejamos esa tontería.